Broadcasting tonight from Chesterton Radio right here in Atchison, Kansas. I want you to try and picture something with me.
Oh, I love a good thought experiment.
Right. Okay, so I don't just mean passively imagine it. I want you to really, put yourself inside this specific environment. So the year is 1965.
Okay.
It's 3:00 a.m., and you are behind the wheel of a car just driving down a dark, completely empty stretch of highway somewhere in the American Midwest.
Just you and the road.
Exactly. The interstate system is still, relatively new. It's cutting through these vast stretches of absolute nothingness.
And, well, I guess no smartphones in your pocket.
Oh, absolutely not. No smartphones, no satellite radio beaming, hundreds of perfectly curated channels from space.
No endless playlists.
Right, no deep dives queued up for the drive. You are entirely, profoundly disconnected from the broader world.
That is, that's almost hard to imagine today.
It really is. The only light inside the cabin of your vehicle is that faint, pale green, almost ghostly glow of the analog dashboard gauges.
Yeah, that classic mid-century dashboard glow.
You know the one. And the only sound is the deep, steady hum of the engine, the tires on the cold asphalt, and the soft crackle of the AM radio dial.
Just that static.
Right. You reach out your fingers, turn that heavy mechanical knob through a sea of static and silence, and you're looking for something. You're looking for a connection.
It really is the ultimate picture of isolation, isn't it?
Yeah, completely isolated.
But there is a profound, almost heavy loneliness to that specific scenario, but also, a very unique kind of psychological receptivity.
Receptivity? What do you mean?
Well, when you're the only car on the road at 3 a.m, all the noise of the daylight world is just gone.
Oh, for sure.
The demands of your job, social obligations, that constant visual stimulation of the sunlit world, all of that has faded away. Your mental defenses are down.
You're just kind of existing.
Exactly. You're in this liminal space. You aren't really in the place you left behind, and you certainly haven't arrived at your destination yet. You're just suspended in the dark.
Waiting for a voice to anchor you.
Yeah, exactly.
And the thing is, in the 1960s, the voices that dominated the airwaves were not exactly designed for that kind of quiet suspension.
No, not at all. It was all about energy.
Right. It was an era largely defined by, high-energy broadcasters. If you spun that dial, you were likely to hit screaming morning zoo DJs warming up for the early shift.
Or those rapid-fire newsmen.
Oh, yeah, delivering headlines with this frantic urgency, fast-talking sports announcers. But then you turn the knob just a fraction of an inch, and you hit a station that feels completely out of place.
It's startlingly different.
It really is. You don't hear a booming voice trying to sell you a washing machine or, hype you up for the weekend.
No, you hear something else entirely.
Yeah, cutting right through the static, you hear a sweeping, lush string orchestra. And floating over that music, you hear a man with a soft, incredibly intimate, resonant delivery. He's speaking sotto voce, almost whispering.
A voice in the night.
Exactly. And he's reading sentimental poetry. He isn't projecting to a stadium. He is speaking right there, in the dark, directly to you.
The contrast must have been entirely jarring the first time a listener stumbled across it.
Oh, it had to be.
Because it breaks all the conventional rules of what commercial broadcasting was supposed to be doing at the height of the 20th century.
Right, because radio was a mass medium.
Exactly. It was designed to capture the largest possible demographic by being loud, bright, and immediate.
Yeah.
But this format, it was subverting the medium entirely.
Turning it on its head.
Yeah. It wasn't about projecting outward to a massive, faceless crowd. It was this exercise in radical intimacy, engineered to speak directly into the ear of one single person.
And the man doing that speaking was a legendary Chicago broadcaster named Franklyn MacCormack.
MacCormack. Just a fascinating figure.
His career was nothing short of an absolute marathon. It spanned from 1930 all the way to 1971.
Over 4 decades.
Yeah. And it only ended because he literally, and we're going to explore the visceral details of this, later he died while he was on the air.
Broadcasting right into the night.
Yeah. So what is our mission for this deep dive today? We are going to unpack the strange, the beautiful, and the deeply intimate world of MacCormack's radio shows.
Which is such a rich topic.
It is. We've pulled together historical records, archives, these incredible deep-cut audio transcripts from his military broadcasts.
Oh, those military ones are unbelievable.
They really are. And we want to construct a picture of this man. But beyond just his biography, we want to understand the architecture of his connection with the listener.
Which is where the real mystery lies, honestly.
Why is that?
Because when you look at the facts of his life, the puzzle pieces just don't immediately seem to fit together.
Right. He wasn't exactly what you'd expect.
No, I mean, how does an everyday, beer-drinking, working-class guy from Waterloo, Iowa, end up creating this intensely devoted audience of insomniacs, long-haul truckers, and soldiers?
All by whispering poetry.
Exactly. And perhaps more importantly, what does his massive success teach us about the fundamental human need for, well, what we might call companion media?
Companion media, I love that term. But before we can understand how he became this comforting phantom of the night dial, we have to look at where he started.
We have to go back to the beginning.
Because the persona he eventually perfected, it wasn't an accident, and it wasn't his first gig.
Not by a long shot.
I was looking through his early biographical details, and it is quite a journey. Born Franklyn MacCormack in 1906 in Waterloo, Iowa, attends the University of Iowa, tries his hand at stage and screen acting, and then in 1930 takes the leap into the wild west of early radio.
Which was a completely different animal back then.
Oh, totally. He starts at a station in South Bend, Indiana, jumps to a larger market in St. Louis, and by 1933, he lands at WBBM in Chicago.
A major hub.
Right. But the sources don't just list him as a DJ. In 1933, WBBM categorized him as an actor, an announcer, and a producer.
Which paints a very different picture of what radio work actually entailed.
Yeah, it was a completely different ecosystem.
In 1933, you didn't have a computer playing a digitized playlist while you sat back and checked your watch.
Definitely not.
The golden age of radio was a voracious machine. Networks had to fill hours and hours of airtime every single day. It was almost entirely live.
No safety net.
None. You couldn't pre-record a segment, do a second take if you flubbed a line, or edit it perfectly in post. You were a workhorse.
You had to do it all.
You had to be incredibly versatile. As an announcer, actor, and producer combined, you were reading sponsor copy cold. You were doing character voices, managing physical sound cues with a live Foley artist in the room, coordinating with live orchestras. The stamina required is just difficult to even comprehend today.
And the sheer variety of the properties he worked on absolutely proves that point.
What kind of shows was he doing?
Well, I was looking at the databases, and I have to share some of these titles because they are just incredible.
Okay, let's hear them.
He was the announcer for the legendary, long-running, old-time radio serial Jack Armstrong, the All-American Boy.
Jack Armstrong.
Yes. Now, when I think of MacCormack, I think of soft poetry. But listen to the titles of the Jack Armstrong episodes he was hyping up on live radio.
I'm ready.
He was opening episodes called The Luminous Dragon Eye Ring.
Oh my goodness, it sounds like the cover of a pulp magazine.
Exactly. Or how about Country of the Headhunters? Adventure of the Sunken Reef, Cave of the Fiery Crocodile.
Cave of the Fiery Crocodile.
Right. He even did an entire massive run of episodes in early 1941 for a storyline titled The Zambo-Anga Adventure.
Wow.
Now, if you are the announcer tasked with opening a live broadcast of Cave of the Fiery Crocodile, you cannot employ a soft, soothing whisper.
No, you put the kids to sleep.
Exactly. You have to burst out of the radio speaker, grab the kids sitting cross-legged around the Zenith radio in their living room, and completely command their attention.
High-octane melodrama.
Exactly. You have to be a vocal chameleon.
And if we look at the broader context of his workload, the sources show he wasn't just doing children's adventure serials.
What else was he doing?
He was announcing for major soap operas and variety shows across both CBS and NBC. Programs like Mert and Marge, Easy Aces, Woman in White,
Oh, wow.
Caroline's Golden Store, and Dot and Will. He had to pivot his emotional register constantly.
From fiery crocodiles to daytime drama.
Right. Sell the cliffhanger stakes of Jack Armstrong in the morning, and then shift to the somber domestic melodrama of a soap opera in the afternoon. He was the quintessential utility player.
Which brings up a massive question for me. I'm looking at a guy who is professionally screaming about luminous dragon rings.
Yeah.
How does a broadcaster make the leap from that frantic daytime action to becoming the undisputed master of whispering poetry in the dark?
It's a huge pivot.
Did he just get tired? Was he a journeyman taking whatever time slot the network threw at him, or was he actively searching for a format that fit his true artistic voice?
I think to answer that, we have to look at how stage acting and live radio actually function mechanically.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, his background as a stage actor, combined with those grueling years as a radio workhorse, provided him with the most intensive training ground imaginable.
For manipulating the theater of the mind.
Exactly. In radio, you have no visual crutches, no meticulously designed sets, no wardrobe, no lighting cues to tell the audience how to feel.
You just have sound waves.
Nothing but sound waves.
Yeah.
So MacCormack learned, through thousands of hours of live reps, how to paint an entire emotional landscape using only the physical timbre of his voice.
Breath control, pacing.
Right. When he eventually transitioned to his nighttime format, we shouldn't view it as him just sitting down and lazily reading poems off a page.
It wasn't passive.
Not at all. We need to view it as a highly calculated, masterful performance. He was performing an atmosphere.
So you're saying the whisper was as much of a character choice as the loud announcer voice?
Precisely. He understood audience psychology. He knew the bombastic, aggressive style required to sell a Jack Armstrong adventure would be physically abrasive to a human being listening alone at 2:0 a.m.
It would just rattle your nerves.
Our nervous systems operate differently in the middle of the night. He used his acting chops to craft a sonic persona engineered for the dark.
Lowering his register.
Lowering his register, slowing his cadence, and utilizing the proximity effect of the microphone.
Getting right up close to the ribbon mic.
Exactly. Getting intimately close so the bass frequencies of his voice would vibrate warmly in the listener's ear. He built it using the tools he honed in the daytime trenches.
That technological aspect of how his voice actually reached the listener is fascinating, and it's a perfect transition to the next era of his career.
The overnight slots.
Yes, because the shift from daytime utility player to nighttime companion was cemented when MacCormack took over the overnight slots on some of the most powerful radio stations in the world.
Truly powerful.
From 1959 until his death in 1971, he hosted a program called the All Night Showcase on WGN out of Chicago.
An iconic run.
And to understand the sheer scale of what he was doing, we have to talk about the physical architecture of these broadcasts. WGN was what the FCC called a clear channel AM radio station.
Right, which was a huge deal back then.
For anyone who grew up entirely in the digital age where a podcast or, a deep dive like this one can be downloaded instantly anywhere on Earth, the concept of a clear channel AM station might sound obscure.
It's almost lost technology to us now.
What exactly did it mean to have a clear channel license in the mid-20th century?
It essentially meant you were given a monopoly over the night sky.
Monopoly over the night sky. I love how poetic that sounds.
It's true, though. The FCC designated a select number of AM radio stations as clear channels. This meant they were granted exclusive rights to broadcast on a specific frequency across a massive geographic area.
So no one else could use that frequency.
Exactly. No other station in the country was allowed to broadcast on that same frequency to interfere with them. But the real magic relies on the actual physics of how AM radio waves travel.
Let's get into the mechanics of that. Why does AM radio behave so differently at night?
It has to do with the Earth's ionosphere.
Okay.
During the daylight hours, the sun's solar radiation bombards the lower layers of the atmosphere, specifically what's called the D layer.
Right.
This layer becomes highly ionized and essentially acts like a massive sponge that absorbs medium-wave AM radio signals. So during the day, a station's reach is primarily limited to its ground wave.
Basically, it's direct line of sight.
Exactly. But when the sun goes down, that solar radiation stops, the sponge dissipates.
And then what happens?
Suddenly, the upper layers of the ionosphere turn into a massive, invisible mirror floating high above the Earth.
A mirror?
Yes. The AM radio signals shoot up into the sky, hit that ionospheric mirror, and bounce back down to the surface, skipping over mountains in the curvature of the Earth itself.
Skipping across the atmosphere.
It's called skywave propagation.
So the signal is literally skipping like a flat stone across a pond.
Exactly. Because WGN was a 50,000-watt powerhouse with no local interference on its frequency, its skywave could travel incredibly long distances.
Right.
A single voice sitting in a studio in Chicago could suddenly be heard clearly in Ohio, down in Missouri, up in Wisconsin, across the Dakotas, and sometimes even down to the Gulf of Mexico.
That is just staggering power. And what did MacCormack choose to do with this godlike technological reach?
He certainly didn't do what everyone else was doing.
No, he didn't. The typical format for overnight broadcasting on these massive signals was like sports talk or continuous news updates or farm reports.
Very practical, very dry stuff.
But MacCormack chose to play classical music. He played big band records, he played sweeping Broadway show tunes, and woven meticulously between the music, he read poetry. He had a very specific, iconic opening for the all-night showcase.
I know exactly the one you mean.
The historical sources note that he would open the program by reciting a poem called Why Do I Love You?
Right.
And he would deliver this famous, haunting line, I love you not only for who you are, but for what I am when I am with you.
Let's just hold on that image for a second.
It's so good.
You have a 50,000-watt transmitter blasting a signal up into the ionosphere, showering it down over half the North American continent.
Yeah.
And the message being delivered isn't an advertisement, and it isn't a news bulletin about the Cold War. It is a profoundly existential, deeply romantic question.
What am I when I am with you?
Exactly. It demands that the listener completely shift their mental state. It requires vulnerability.
Which begs the question, who is receptive to that kind of vulnerability at 3 a.m?
A very specific kind of person.
Because of that massive clear channel reach, his audience naturally segmented into very specific demographics. The core of his listeners became long-haul truckers.
That makes so much sense.
Right. If you were driving an 18-wheeler from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, all the way to Omaha, Nebraska in 1965, you are crossing multiple state lines in the dead of night. With the local station, you'd have to constantly retune the dial every 50 miles as the signal faded to static.
Which is so frustrating.
But with WGN, you locked it in once, and MacCormack stayed with you for the entire journey across the continent.
He was literally riding shotgun with them.
Exactly. And alongside the truckers, the audience was comprised of insomniacs, night shift nurses walking the quiet halls of hospitals, security guards, factory workers.
The invisible workforce.
Basically the people who keep the world turning while everyone else sleeps.
If we really analyze the psychological state of that specific midnight audience, the genius of MacCormack's format becomes incredibly clear.
How so?
Nighttime is when our psychological defenses crumble. The daylight hours are filled with distractions, errands, conversations, the physical demands of labor.
You're just busy.
But at 3 a.m., the distractions vanish. And our underlying anxieties, our griefs, our regrets, they all tend to bubble up to the surface.
Oh, absolutely. The 3 a.m. thoughts.
Right. So if you are a trucker, hypnotized by the endless white lines of the highway, or an insomniac staring at the ceiling worried about your mortgage, the traditional upbeat chatter of a morning radio DJ feels intensely alienating.
It feels false.
It does. It highlights your isolation because the voice on the radio sounds like it belongs to a different, happier world that you are currently excluded from.
It's basically toxic positivity before that term even existed.
Exactly. MacCormack's slower, quieter, poetic format didn't demand energy from the listener. It respected their exhaustion. It offered a shared sense of melancholy, which ironically is much more comforting than artificial cheerfulness.
You know, looking at this through a modern lens, it feels like the direct evolutionary ancestor of media we consume today to manage our anxiety.
Like what?
I'm thinking about those lo-fi hip-hop beats to relax or study to.
Of the YouTube streams?
Yeah, with the animated girl endlessly writing in her notebook. Or ASMR recordings, or even just long-form conversational shows where people aren't debating, they're just talking.
Just a hangout vibe.
Right. The goal of that modern media isn't narrative. You aren't tuning in to find out what happens next in a plot. You tune in for the atmospheric vibe.
It's companion media.
It is companion media. You put it on because you want the psychological sensation that there is someone else in the room with you, breathing the same air, keeping the monsters at bay so you don't have to hold the line all by yourself.
That is a phenomenal parallel. It is the exact same psychological function, just utilizing the technology of a different era.
Yep.
And the desire for that specific type of companionship was so potent, so deeply felt by his audience, that it manifested in the real world in ways that are genuinely staggering to read about.
I am so glad you brought that up, because the source material detailing his summer remote broadcasts absolutely blew my mind.
The Wisconsin Dells story.
Yes. For 2 weeks, every single summer, MacCormack would leave the WGN studios in Chicago and broadcast the all-night showcase live from a place called Uphoff's Rotunda Motel and Restaurant.
Up in Wisconsin Dells.
Right, up in the Dells. The arrangement was set up by a local water ski show impresario named Tommy Bartlett. Now, Wisconsin Dells is a resort town, but think about what was actually happening here. People would literally pack up their cars and drive from Madison, from La Crosse, from Dubuque, Iowa, from Milwaukee, and from Chicago.
Hours and hours of driving.
They would take interstate road trips just to go to a motel restaurant and physically watch Franklyn MacCormack read poetry and philosophize into a microphone.
It sounds absurd on paper, doesn't it?
It really does.
A newspaper article from the Chicago Tribune in 1965 explicitly reported that these remote radio pickups at the motel were drawing larger nightly crowds than the biggest, most expensive nightclubs in the city of Chicago.
People were willingly skipping high-energy entertainment.
So Korean at all.
They were skipping stand-up comedians, live jazz bands, cocktail lounges, just to go stand in a motel and watch a middle-aged man read poems about the sunset and the passage of time.
And the reason they made that pilgrimage goes back to the concept of the parasocial relationship.
Right.
They weren't traveling to see a celebrity in the traditional sense. When a voice speaks directly into your ear, alone in the dark, night after night, for years on end, your brain begins to encode that person as a member of your physical tribe.
Like a trusted friend.
Yes.
Yeah.
The audience felt a genuine reciprocal relationship with him. They were driving to Wisconsin Dells to visit a friend who had kept them company through hundreds of lonely nights. They wanted to physically share space with the voice that had anchored them.
But this brings us to what might be the most fascinating aspect of his entire career.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
I want to call this the grand illusion, because there is a massive, brilliant paradox sitting right at the center of Franklyn MacCormack's identity.
There really is.
The man who was seducing this late-night audience with effete, deeply romantic, highly sensitive poetry, he was actually nothing like the persona he projected on the airwaves.
The contrast is stark.
Yeah.
And it tells us a lot about his skill as a broadcaster.
Right. To a listener out in the dark, he sounded like an aloof, perhaps slightly tragic, romantic figure.
You'd picture a man spending his nights brooding in a velvet armchair.
With an ascot?
Surrounded by leather-bound volumes of Keats and Shelley, gazing thoughtfully out a rain-streaked window.
Exactly. But the historical sources describe the real Franklyn MacCormack as an incredibly gregarious, blue-collar, ordinary Joe.
A guy who fundamentally liked a cold beer and a good sandwich.
Precisely. He was the kind of guy who could walk down the busy streets of Chicago and blend right in with the plumbers, the factory workers, and the cab drivers.
Now, he was successful. He famously owned one of the largest, shiniest black Cadillacs in the city.
Bought with his own earnings.
Proudly bought with his own earnings. But his personality was fiercely grounded in the working class. And this was explicitly reflected in the commercial realities of his show.
Who sponsored it?
Well, his all-night broadcast wasn't sponsored by a luxury Swiss watch company or a high-end French wine distributor. It was sponsored by Meisterbrau beer.
Meisterbrau, which was the ultimate unpretentious working man's drink in Chicago at the time.
Yes. And what makes MacCormack a genius of the medium is that he didn't try to hide this contradiction from his audience.
He leaned into it.
He didn't rigidly protect the illusion of the velvet-robed poet.
Yeah.
In fact, he actively and purposefully played with the contradiction live on the air. He would deliberately shatter his own romantic illusions.
I love the specific details of how he did this.
It's so good.
The archives note that he would finish reading this sweeping, emotionally devastating poem about, the eternal nature of the soul and the stars. He would take a deep, dramatic breath, and then, without missing a beat, he would casually inform his audience that as soon as the next record started playing, he was going to run down to the corner newsstand, buy the early edition of the morning paper, and read it while munching on a hot corned beef sandwich.
It is a masterclass in pacing, and it reveals a profound understanding of audience psychology.
How so?
Well, there's a deeper philosophical angle here, something very akin to a Chestertonian worldview.
Oh, I like where this is going.
The idea that true wonder isn't found by escaping into the ethereal, but by finding the romance and the dignity in the ordinary, everyday world.
The poetry of the corned beef sandwich.
Exactly.
But wait, I have to challenge this premise. I have to push back a little here.
Okay, lay it on me.
If you are a broadcaster and you spend 10 minutes beautifully reciting earnest poetry about the fragility of human life, and then you immediately follow it up with a joke about mustard and a corned beef sandwich.
Yeah.
Aren't you undercutting the art? Doesn't that make the poetry feel like a cheap gimmick?
It's completely intuitive to think that.
Right. Aren't you basically mocking your own format and telling the audience not to take the emotions seriously?
It is a massive risk for a performer to take, absolutely. Yeah. But if we analyze the specific psychological landscape of his audience, the truckers, the laborers, the night watchmen, the exact opposite is true.
The opposite?
Think about it. If MacCormack had maintained a purely ethereal, lofty, inaccessible persona, he would have alienated them entirely.
They would have rolled their eyes.
Exactly. A teamster hauling steel across Ohio doesn't necessarily relate to a 19th century British romantic poet brooding in a velvet chair.
Fair point.
But by combining the high sentimentality of the verse with the deeply mundane, gritty reality of a corned beef sandwich and a cheap beer, he grounded the emotion.
He anchored it to reality.
Yes. He was essentially telling his audience, you can appreciate profound beauty, you can be moved to tears by a poem, but you still have to wake up and live in the real working-class world tomorrow.
It made the poetry accessible because it was being delivered by a guy who felt like a peer.
Not a professor talking down to them.
He's saying, I'm looking up at the exact same stars you are, but my feet are firmly planted on the greasy pavement right next to yours.
Precisely.
There is an incredible story from late in his career that illustrates his commitment to this grounded reality perfectly.
Like a concert.
Yes, the concert. He did a live appearance in Chicago, teaming up with Nelson Eddy, the incredibly famous singer and actor.
Huge store.
Huge. And for this highly anticipated live appearance in front of his most devoted fans, MacCormack purposely left his flowing theatrical toupee at home.
He just left it.
Left it. He stepped out from behind the curtain, quite literally, to let his fans see the simple, balding, distinctly unglamorous radio announcer he actually was in real life.
That is amazing.
He flat out refused to maintain the physical illusion of the brooding romantic hero.
Which is a remarkably brave and vulnerable thing for any performer to do, especially in an era heavily focused on a polished image.
Yeah, TV was taking over. Image was everything.
It shows a deep, abiding respect for his audience. He trusted that they loved him for the emotional connection he provided in the dark, not for a fabricated visual aesthetic.
And it proves that the poetry wasn't just a gimmick, because despite the jokes about the sandwiches, MacCormack's vocal delivery of the actual verse was so incredibly sincere, so devoid of modern irony that it transcended the idea of a bit.
Sincerity was his superpower.
He meant every single word he was reading in the moment he was reading it. In fact, his style was so specific, so utterly recognizable that it inspired legendary comedy.
Bob and Ray.
Yes. The great comedy duo Bob and Ray created a recurring character named Charles the Poet.
That's such a funny bit.
And the entire premise of the joke was that Charles couldn't get through reading one of his own overly sentimental poems without breaking down into hysterical, inappropriate laughter.
It was a direct, loving, and highly targeted parody of MacCormack's hushed, intensely serious delivery.
When you are being parodied by the absolute best in the business, it proves that you have created an archetype. You've created something wholly original that has penetrated the culture.
It's the ultimate compliment. And it proves that he wasn't just a lightweight late-night DJ reading empty greeting card rhymes to pass the time.
Right.
The emotions he was dealing with, the themes he was routinely touching on, they had real substantive weight.
Exactly. And to prove that point definitively, that MacCormack was capable of profound philosophical depth, I want to transition to some incredible archival material we found.
This is the part that really surprised me.
We are going to dig into the actual surviving audio transcripts from his time hosting a program called Hymns from Home, because this is where the sheer moral gravity of his broadcasting becomes undeniable.
Hymns from Home is an absolutely vital chapter in his story,
Mm-hmm.
because this program wasn't just being broadcast out of Chicago on WGN.
No, it went much further.
This took MacCormack's voice global, and it completely changed the context of who he was speaking to.
Right. This program was produced specifically for the United States Armed Forces Radio Service. His voice was being beamed to active-duty military personnel stationed all over the world. The format of the show featured choir numbers with prominent soloists like Marjorie Meyer and Bruce Foote, and MacCormack would provide the spoken readings in between the hymns.
The context of this audience changes the math on everything he says.
Oh, entirely.
He's no longer just speaking to a trucker driving down I-80 who might be a little lonely. He is speaking to young men and women deployed in the military, stationed far from their families.
Facing incredible tension.
Yes, facing high-stakes geopolitical tension, potentially facing active combat, and reckoning with their own mortality. The psychological need for comfort in that demographic is immense.
And the text of what he chose to say to those soldiers is breathtaking. I want to read a specific quote from one of his monologues that survived in these historical transcripts,
Let's hear it.
because it deals head-on with the concepts of tolerance, prejudice, and brotherhood. Keep in mind the timeline here. This is mid-century America. He is broadcasting to a military audience during an era defined by global conflict and intense domestic racial division.
Right, the 40s and 50s.
MacCormack says, "A child is born and comes into this world knowing nothing of its languages, its hopes, its fears, of its grudges brought down from ancient times long past and growing. He learns from us, his elders. He learns much that is good, yet often that which is to twist his mind and set him against his fellow man."
That's powerful.
And then he gets incredibly bravely pointed. He continues, "How shallow are we, how poor and how blind that we plant within our children the ancient hates, the old taboos brought down in ignorance from that darkness of centuries, the hates that men have had for others not of their own faith. The hates men have had for those whose skins were not colored as their own. How weak and unthinking we are to give these hates new life in every generation, to sow their seed and bring down upon us the pestilence of war and misery." And he finishes that broadcast by openly advocating for the National Conference of Christians and Jews, and he explicitly calls for the concept of world brotherhood.
We really need to pause and unpack the absolute gravity of those words.
It's so heavy.
This elevates MacCormack entirely from a comforting late-night DJ to a genuine moral philosopher of the airwaves. Consider the sociological weight of what he's doing.
Speaking to the troops.
He is broadcasting to active-duty military personnel, an organization inherently built on the concept of defeating external enemies through force.
Right.
And yet, he is choosing to use his platform to speak not just about missing mom's apple pie or the girl back home, but about the moral imperative of creating a world entirely free of war and racial hatred.
He is explicitly calling out prejudice based on religion and skin color, framing it not as a natural human condition, but as an inherited disease.
The ancient hates.
The ancient hates that elders twist into the minds of children.
Exactly. To understand the risk and the weight of that, you have to place yourself in the historical timeline.
Right.
Depending on the exact year of the broadcast, he is speaking to a military that is either dealing with the immediate raw friction of racial integration, since President Truman desegregated the armed forces in 1948, or dealing with the explosive, violent civil rights battles happening back home in the 50s and 60s. By calling out the hates men have for those of different faiths or different skin colors, he is asking a military audience to look inward at the domestic divisions of humanity.
He's saying, if we want to avoid the literal pestilence of war, we have to start by actively dismantling our own internal learned prejudices.
It is a profoundly subversive, deeply humanistic message to deliver on a military network.
And what makes him so effective is how he balances that heavy, challenging philosophical rhetoric with an immense amount of spiritual comfort.
The comfort is key.
Because a soldier wrestling with these massive ideas also desperately needs an anchor. I want to share some quotes from the actual poems he chose to read on this program because they provide that exact function. He read a piece by a writer named Wind Bunning called In God's Kingdom, where he recites, "There are no wars in heaven and hatred is not there." He talks vividly about a land of sweet reunion where there is no grief. And then there is a poem by George C. Keller called There Is No Change, which I found incredibly moving when considering the audience of deployed soldier.
Let's hear that one.
He reads, "The children play about my door as in the years gone by, and in the fall as heretofore the robins southward fly. God's laws remain intact, his promises are sure."
If we synthesize these different pieces of the transcript, the explicit call for world brotherhood, the vision of a celestial realm without war, the poem about the seasons and the robins remaining completely unchanged,
What do you see?
there's a very clear, deliberate recurring theme here. Stability. Unshakable stability in a chaotic, violent world.
There is no change. That is the core message he is sending overseas.
When you are deployed in a combat zone, or frankly when you are driving alone in the dark struggling with your own internal demons, the world feels violently unstable.
It feels chaotic.
It feels unpredictable, dangerous, and completely out of your control. Everything you know has been upended.
Right.
Whether MacCormack was quoting, as he did in other transcripts, religion is the true philosophy, or warning that falsehood always punishes itself, he was offering a psychological anchor.
A tether to reality.
He was telling the listener that despite the chaos of human conflict, despite the loneliness of the night shift, there are underlying fundamental laws of nature, of morality, of the universe that remain completely intact.
The robins still fly south.
The children still play. It was, in the truest and deepest sense, spiritual nourishment for a starving audience.
He was providing a mental safe harbor. He was the steady, unchanging heartbeat for people who felt like their own lives were spinning wildly out of control.
Precisely. And he did it all with that calm, measured, resonant voice. The delivery was just as important as the text. The medium was the message.
Which makes the end of his story so incredibly poignant and, frankly, so jarring.
It's tragic.
Because this voice, this man who offered so much immense comfort and unyielding stability to millions of others, was silenced in a way that is abruptly poetic, visceral, and tragically fitting.
It really shatters the illusion we've been talking about in the most absolute way possible.
Let's move to the final broadcast.
It is one of the most remarkable and sobering pieces of live radio history I've ever researched.
On the night of June 12, 1971, Franklyn MacCormack went to work at the WGN studios just like he had for decades. He was on the air, sitting behind the microphone, hosting the all-night showcase. During the very first hour of the show, while a record was playing out over the airwaves to half the country, he suffered a severe medical emergency right there in the studio.
And we have to inject the medical context here. He had been actively struggling with his health.
Right, this wasn't totally out of nowhere.
No, he had suffered his first major heart attack just 9 months prior to this night. This incident in the studio was his second heart attack, and this one would prove to be fatal.
So sad.
He was rushed immediately from the radio station to a local hospital, and he died a few hours later on a Saturday afternoon.
But the detail that really sticks out, the surreal, gritty, almost darkly comedic detail that longtime listeners vividly remember from that night, is what actually happened on the airwaves during the chaos.
It's almost unbelievable.
Because MacCormack, as we discussed, had always joked about running out for a corned beef sandwich between poems.
Yeah, his signature bit.
And his longtime audio engineer, the guy who was physically with him in the studio when he collapsed, actually commented on air amidst the confusion that MacCormack had choked on a corned beef sandwich.
It is the ultimate, violently abrupt collision of his two distinct personas.
It really is.
You have the romantic, ethereal poetry, the sweeping classical music physically spinning on the turntable, the hushed, sacred midnight atmosphere he had meticulously crafted. And then it is instantly shattered by the sudden, visceral, biological reality of a heart attack and a corned beef sandwich. It destroys the illusion of the immortal poet in the most heartbreaking, deeply human way possible.
The reality of the working-class guy from Chicago completely overtaking the ethereal voice in the night. Oh. The immediate aftermath of his death was swift. WGN had to keep broadcasting. His time slot was initially filled by a staff newscaster and occasional guest host named Cliff Mercer.
But the audience reaction was immense.
Oh, massive. It proved exactly what kind of relationship he had built. Just 2 days after he died, 2,500 people gathered in person to honor his passing.
2,500 people mobilizing that quickly in 1971.
Before social media, before email blasts.
For a late-night radio host, it speaks volumes about the depth of the parasocial connection we talked about earlier.
Like they lost a friend.
As we discussed, the human brain doesn't fully differentiate between a voice on a speaker and a physical presence in the room. Those 2,500 people weren't mourning a distant celebrity. They were grieving the actual biological loss of a trusted companion. The grief was very real.
And the footprints he left behind in the broader culture are so strange, so eclectic, and so wonderful.
They really are. His legacy pops up in the most unexpected corners of history.
Where else does he pop up?
Well, for instance, in 1971, following his death, the Franklyn MacCormack Music Library was established in his honor at the Dixon State School in Dixon, Illinois.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And that makes perfect sense, right? A dedicated music library for a man who championed the emotional power of beautiful music.
But then there's the pop culture footprint. This is absolute gold and easily my favorite piece of trivia from our research.
Oh, the band.
Yes, the Bonzo Dog Duda Band, which was a brilliant, highly influential, wonderfully absurd British comedy rock band. They released a track called The Intro and the Outro.
I've heard this song. It's wild.
In this song, they're introducing a completely bizarre fictional orchestra, name-dropping all sorts of famous historical figures and celebrities playing random instruments. They introduced John Wayne on xylophone, Adolf Hitler on vibes.
Just utter nonsense.
Right in the middle of this deeply absurd British comedy song, they credit Franklyn MacCormack on the harmonica.
Which is just wonderfully surreal.
It really is.
But from a sociological perspective, it shows how deeply his voice had penetrated the cultural consciousness. His specific brand of earnestness was so potent that it crossed the Atlantic and landed in the minds of British satirists. He was a recognized archetype of American broadcasting.
So after analyzing the breadth of this incredible life, what does this all mean for us today? When we look back at the immense scope of his career, from the screaming, pulpy melodrama of Jack Armstrong in the 1930s to the quiet, dignified, poetic dying breath in a Chicago radio studio in 1971.
MacCormack represents a completely lost era of broadcasting.
He absolutely does.
He was working in a medium that, today, we strictly associate with constant, relentless stimulation. If you look at the landscape of modern audio and digital media, it is overwhelmingly driven by shock jock tactics.
Fast-paced micro-editing.
Aggressive hot takes, algorithms specifically designed to manufacture outrage. The entire digital ecosystem is engineered to agitate the listener's nervous system just to keep them scrolling.
It's exhausting.
MacCormack did the exact polar opposite. He utilized slowness as an art form. He wielded silence like an instrument.
He leaned into pure sentimentality without a shred of modern irony.
Exactly. He recognized with profound empathy that there was a massive audience out there in the dark that didn't want to be yelled at, sold to, or agitated. They just wanted to be sat with. They wanted the dignity of a quiet moment.
Okay, let's bring this all the way back to the present moment.
Let's do it.
You, listening to this deep dive right now, whether you are driving your car down a highway or folding laundry in your living room, or lying in bed staring at the ceiling unable to sleep, you are participating in the exact same fundamental human tradition that Franklyn MacCormack perfected.
We put voices in our ears.
Yes, to learn new historical facts, to be entertained, to gather information about the world. But on a much deeper, much more biological level, we put voices in our ears to feel less alone in the universe.
We are all, in some way, constantly turning that heavy dial in the dark, looking for our own companion media.
And that leads to a philosophical question I think is deeply worth reflecting on, based directly on MacCormack's own words.
His sign-off.
His signature sign-off, the phrase he used to close his broadcasts and say goodnight to millions of people, went exactly like this. If I may leave one bar of melody to echo down the countless years, knowing my years were not all in vain.
That is just beautiful. We spent this time discussing the deliberate, measured pace of his show versus the frantic, agitated pace of our modern world.
Right.
So as you go about the rest of your day, or as you drift off to sleep tonight, I would ask you to seriously consider the media diet you consume.
Think about what you're tuning into.
In an age of endless scrolling, of 15-second videos that vanish as you watch them, of algorithmic outrage constantly fighting a war for your limited attention, where do you actually find your voice in the night?
Where is the media in your life that respects your exhaustion?
The media that asks you to slow down, to listen to the quiet space between the words, and to remember that there is still profound, ordinary beauty in the world.
Because if we don't have that in our lives, well, maybe we need to keep turning the dial until we find it.